Whenever we had dinner at my in-laws, I would pass out in a bizarrely deep sleep. I would wake up with my blouse misbuttoned and my lipstick smeared, but my husband just laughed it off as exhaustion. Then I heard the recording and realized the horrifying truth. My name is Felicity. I am 33 years old, and I work as an elite cybersecurity auditor for a top financial firm in Chicago. I thought I had built a secure and loving life with the man of my dreams. But sitting in the suffocatingly opulent living room of his family penthouse, the illusion began to shatter. The waking was never sudden. It was a slow, agonizing crawl through layers of thick, unnatural fog. My eyelids felt as though they had been weighted down with lead, and a dull, rhythmic pounding echoed at the base of my skull. The first thing that registered was the texture beneath me. It was the familiar, stiff velvet of my mother-in-law, Patricia, and her custom chaise lounge. The air in the penthouse always smelled the same, a cloying mixture of expensive floral room spray and the sharp, smoky scent of aged scotch. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt disconnected, heavy, and uncoordinated. As I shifted my weight, a cold draft brushed across my chest. I blinked against the harsh glare of the crystal chandelier overhead and looked down. My silk blouse, which I had carefully buttoned to the collarbone before arriving for dinner, was completely misaligned. 3 buttons were fastened into the wrong holes, leaving the fabric gaping wide open and exposing the lace edge of my bra. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked through my chest. I brought a trembling hand up to my face, and my fingertips brushed against a thick, waxy streak dragging across my cheek. My lipstick. It was smeared all the way up to my cheekbone, as if someone had carelessly wiped a hand across my mouth. A low, dry chuckle broke the silence in the room. I snapped my head up, wincing as the sudden movement sent a spike of pain through my temples. Across the expansive living room framed by floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering Chicago skyline, sat my husband Derek and his mother Patricia. They looked like a portrait of generational wealth and entitlement. Derek, at 35, wore his custom-tailored suit with an effortless, careless grace. He was swirling a heavy crystal glass of amber liquid, looking at me not with concern, but with a patronizing smirk. Patricia sat opposite him in a high-backed armchair. At 60, she maintained an impeccably youthful appearance, her posture rigid, her expression radiating absolute disdain. "What happened?" I asked. My voice came out as a raspy, pathetic whisper. I reached up awkwardly, fumbling with the tiny pearl buttons of my blouse, my face burning with a deep, consuming flush of humiliation. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely disoriented. Patricia uncrossed her long legs and sighed loudly, making sure to project her exhaustion with my very existence. "You could not even handle 1 glass of Merlot, Felicity," she sneered. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet room like a blade. "Honestly, it is embarrassing. Derek had to carry you from the dining table like a toddler. We were in the middle of a wonderful conversation about Richard and his new real estate development, and you simply face-planted into your napkin." I looked at Derek, silently pleading for him to intervene, to offer some comfort, or at least soften the blow of his mother and her harsh words. We had been married for 3 years, and I still held on to the naive hope that he would protect me from her constant belittling. Instead, he took a slow sip of his scotch and laughed a dismissive, patronizing sound that made my stomach churn. "Do not be too hard on her, Mom," Derek said, though there was no warmth in his defense. "You know how she gets. That stressful little IT job of hers is making her hysterical and weak. She stares at computer screens all day, hunting for imaginary bugs, and it completely drains her. I keep telling her she needs to quit and learn how to relax. Maybe take up tennis or join your charity committee. But you know Felicity, always trying to prove she belongs in the corporate world." The casual dismissal of my career felt like a physical blow. I was not just an IT worker. I was a senior cybersecurity auditor who had built a massive hidden portfolio from a software patent I developed before we even met. I managed complex, high-stakes digital investigations. Yet in this room, surrounded by their inherited wealth, my hard work was reduced to a punchline, a silly little hobby that made me too fragile to stay awake through a family dinner. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and demand to know why my clothes were disheveled, why my makeup was ruined, and why neither of them seemed to care that I had lost complete track of time and space. But my professional training kicked in. As an auditor, I knew that when the numbers did not add up, you never tipped your hand to the suspect. You gathered your data, you stayed quiet, and you looked closer. "I am so sorry, Patricia," I said, forcing my voice to sound meek and apologetic. I kept my eyes lowered, playing the exact role they expected of me, the fragile, overworked, inadequate daughter-in-law. "I do not know what came over me. I have just been so tired lately. I did not mean to ruin the evening." Derek set his glass down with a satisfied clink. He walked over to me, offering a hand to pull me up from the chaise lounge. His grip was a little too tight, his smile a little too wide. "See, Mom, she just needs rest," he said, treating me like a delicate, slightly defective pet. "Come on, sweetheart, let us get you home so you can sleep it off." I nodded, avoiding Patricia and her victorious smirk as I gathered my coat. But as Derek turned his back to collect his keys, my demeanor shifted internally. The fog in my brain was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, calculating terror. My heart raced against my ribs, hammering a frantic rhythm that I prayed Derek could not hear. I did not argue with them, because I knew something they did not. I remembered the dinner perfectly, right up until the moment my vision had gone black. I remembered Patricia handing me a crystal goblet. I remembered the perfectly roasted tenderloin. And I knew for an absolute, undeniable fact that I did not drink the Merlot. I do not even like red wine. I had only taken a few sips of the iced water Patricia had personally poured and handed to me, with a strangely insistent smile. My gaze drifted to the entryway console table, where my designer handbag sat exactly where Derek had placed it when we arrived. A shiver ran down my spine. Lately, Derek had developed a disturbing habit of claiming I had agreed to transfer funds from my private savings to his checking account while I was half asleep or exhausted from work. I had started doubting my own memory, wondering if my demanding job was truly causing me to forget conversations. To prove to myself that I was not losing my mind, I had purchased a tiny high-tech voice-activated digital recorder. Before we stepped into the penthouse elevator tonight, I had slipped it deep into the lining of my purse and turned it on. As Derek wrapped his arm around my waist to guide me out the door, playing the role of the attentive, caring husband, I leaned into him and faked a weary sigh. I just needed to get home. I needed to lock myself in the bathroom, play the dutiful, exhausted wife, and listen to that recording. Because whatever happened during the 2 hours I was unconscious, the truth was waiting for me in that bag. And I had a sickening feeling that my life was about to be irreversibly destroyed. The elevator ride down to the subterranean parking garage was suffocatingly quiet. Derek stood beside me, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his expensive tailored slacks. He did not ask how my head felt, or if I needed water. His only concern seemed to be checking his reflection in the mirrored doors. When we finally reached his sleek black sedan, he unlocked it with a sharp chirp that made my temples throb. I slid into the passenger seat, resting my heavy head against the cool, pristine leather headrest. The drive back to our townhouse was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Derek gripped the steering wheel with one hand, navigating the quiet Chicago streets while launching into a calculated lecture. "You really need to get your act together, Felicity," he said, his voice dripping with condescending patience. "Mom was incredibly gracious about your little episode tonight, but it is not a good look. You passed out before the main course was even cleared. It is just embarrassing." I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur into streaks of yellow and white. "I am sorry," I murmured, keeping my tone perfectly submissive. "I really am. I just felt so exhausted suddenly." He let out a sharp, mocking sigh. "It is that ridiculous job of yours. You let them work you into the ground hunting down software glitches. You have zero stamina. It is making you physically weak. A wife should be able to sit through a simple family dinner without collapsing like a Victorian damsel. You need to ask for reduced hours, or just quit entirely. I can take care of us. You know that." I nodded slowly, letting the shadows of the car hide my expression. I knew exactly how he liked to take care of us. Over the past year, Derek had slowly tried to insert himself into every aspect of my daily routine, masking his control as husbandly concern. He wanted access to my emails, my schedule, and especially my finances. But I had always kept a firm boundary around my professional life and the wealth I built long before he ever bought me a diamond ring. I played the dutiful, apologetic wife for the rest of the drive, agreeing that I needed to manage my stress better. But beneath my quiet agreements, my mind was racing. The heavy weight of my designer handbag resting on my lap felt like a ticking time bomb. We pulled into the driveway of our Lincoln Park townhouse. The house was dark and silent. Derek parked the car and killed the engine, letting out another heavy sigh, as if my very existence was a burden he was forced to carry. "Go straight to bed," he instructed, without looking at me. "I have some emails to catch up on in my office, since your dramatic exit ruined my evening. I will sleep in the guest room tonight, so I do not wake you." I agreed immediately, expressing gratitude for his consideration. I walked through the front door, kicked off my heels, and clutched my purse tightly against my side. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. Once inside, I did not change into pajamas or remove my makeup. I walked straight into the master bathroom and quietly shut the solid oak door behind me. I turned the lock with a soft click. To be safe, I turned on the shower, letting the hot water hit the tile floor with a loud, steady rush. The steam quickly began to fill the room, fogging the large mirrors and wrapping me in a suffocating, humid heat. I sat down on the edge of the large porcelain bathtub, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I carefully unzipped my purse and reached deep into the hidden, zippered interior pocket. My fingers brushed against the small, rectangular shape of the digital voice recorder. I pulled it out. The tiny red light was no longer glowing, indicating it had stopped recording when the ambient noise in the penthouse had died down. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I retrieved a pair of wireless earbuds from my makeup drawer, synced them to the device, and placed them in my ears. I pressed play. At first, there was only the muffled sound of our arrival. I heard the clinking of crystal glasses, the polite, hollow laughter, and Patricia making a passive-aggressive comment about my dress. I hit the fast-forward button, skipping ahead through the mundane dinner conversation. I stopped when I heard the distinct sound of a chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. It was my chair. I heard a heavy, lifeless thud, followed immediately by the sharp clatter of silverware hitting porcelain. That must have been the moment I collapsed. I braced myself, expecting to hear Derek rushing to my side, expecting to hear Patricia calling for help. Instead, the recording captured a chilling, unnatural silence. Then Patricia spoke. Her voice was not panicked or concerned. It was cold, clinical, and completely devoid of empathy. "Is she completely under?" Patricia asked. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Derek responded, his voice sounding entirely too calm. "She is out cold. That new prescription you got from Dr. Eris works fast. Grab her legs, let us get her to the chaise lounge before she drools on the Persian rug." My blood ran ice cold. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp. They had drugged me. My own husband and his mother had intentionally drugged me. I listened in absolute horror as the recording continued. I heard the rustle of fabric, the sound of my heavy, unconscious body being dropped onto the velvet cushions. Then the true nightmare began. "Get her phone out of her purse," Patricia commanded. "Hurry up, Derek. We do not have all night. The sedative will only keep her this deeply under for another hour or so." I heard the zipper of my purse opening. Derek muttered under his breath. "I have the phone. Open the banking app. We need to initiate the wire transfer to the holding account immediately." There was a pause filled only by my own shallow, drugged breathing on the recording. Then Derek cursed loudly. "Damn it," she logged out. "It is asking for Face ID. I told you she was getting paranoid." "Hold her head still, Derek," Patricia ordered, her tone turning sharp and impatient. "The Face ID will not work if her eyes are closed. Prop the lids up. Use your thumbs." I squeezed my eyes shut in the steamy bathroom bile rising in my throat. The horrific mental image of my husband forcibly prying my unconscious eyes open to unlock my personal phone made me want to vomit. I heard the sound of flesh moving, my own groans of discomfort captured on the tape as they physically manipulated my face. "Got it," Derek said, breathless with cruel excitement. "We are in. Okay, navigating to the offshore portfolio now. Let us move the $2.5 million. That should cover the margin call and leave enough for us to breathe." A long, tense silence followed on the recording. Then Derek let out a string of vicious, hateful profanities. He slammed his hand against a glass table, the sharp sound making me flinch. "What is it?" Patricia demanded. "It is blocked," Derek yelled, his voice laced with pure rage. "She changed the security settings. It is requiring a physical token key to authorize any transfer over $5,000. Where the hell is her token key? "Search her pockets," Patricia snapped. "Check her bra. Check everywhere." I listened to the horrifying sound of my husband tearing at my silk blouse. His hands roughly searched my clothing, popping the delicate pearl buttons from their buttonholes in his frantic, greedy rush to steal my money. They did not find the token key because it was locked securely in a biometric safe at my corporate office. The recording captured their eventual defeat, their furious, venomous whispers as they realized they could not access my wealth. I pulled the earbuds out, the hot steam of the shower mingling with the cold sweat covering my skin. I stared at my reflection in the fogged mirror and realized, with sickening clarity, that my husband and his elite, snobbish family were actively drugging me to steal my self-made fortune. I stood frozen in the damp heat of the bathroom for a long time. The recording had ended, but Patricia and her cold, calculating voice echoed relentlessly in my ears. I felt a violent wave of nausea wash over me. I sank to my knees on the bath mat, wrapping my arms tightly around my stomach. Every instinct screamed at me to kick down the guest room door, confront Derek, and demand answers. But my training as a cybersecurity auditor taught me that confronting a hostile actor without a fully fortified defense was corporate suicide. The same rule applied here. If I confronted them now, they would simply deny it, destroy the evidence, and likely accelerate their plans. I needed irrefutable proof, and I needed to protect my assets before they found a way around my token key. I took a deep breath, splashed cold water on my face, and prepared for the hardest performance of my life. The next morning I woke up early and carefully applied my makeup, deliberately hiding the dark circles under my eyes with heavy concealer. I walked down to the kitchen where Derek was already sipping black coffee and scrolling through his tablet. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my facial muscles to relax into a warm, apologetic smile. "Good morning," I said softly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He barely looked up, offering a non-committal grunt. I walked over and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek, fighting the intense urge to pull away from his skin. "I feel so much better today," I lied smoothly. "You were right. I have been pushing myself too hard at the office. I'm going to wrap up a few minor reports and take it easy this afternoon." He finally looked at me, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his handsome features. "Good girl," he said, completely unaware that his patronizing tone only fueled my burning resolve. I grabbed my coat and drove straight past my office building. Instead, I headed to a discreet private medical clinic on the north side of the city. I paid in cash, ensuring the visit would never show up on our joint health insurance statements. I told the attending physician that I suspected I had been exposed to an unknown substance the night before. Within 20 minutes, a phlebotomist was drawing my blood. The waiting room felt like an absolute eternity. I paced the small, sterile room, mentally cataloging every asset, every account, and every vulnerability in my financial architecture. When the doctor finally returned, his expression was grave. He held a printed report in his hands. "You were correct to come in, Felicity," he said quietly. "Your toxicology screen shows elevated levels of a powerful prescription-grade sedative. It is a central nervous system depressant, typically used for severe insomnia or pre-surgical anesthesia. It is not something you could accidentally ingest." I asked him for a certified copy of the report, thanking him politely. I folded the paper, slid it into my purse next to the digital recorder, and walked out to my car. The concrete proof was the catalyst I needed. The sadness and betrayal evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. I drove to my corporate office, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my multi-monitor workstation. It was time to build a fortress. For the next 5 hours, I did not take a single break. I logged into my private wealth portal using my biometric scanner and the physical token key they had so desperately searched for. I watched the screen load, displaying the $2.5 million I had earned from my software patent before Derek and I even started dating. It was my money, my security, and they had tried to steal it while I lay unconscious on their velvet couch. I immediately began the process of severing every connection between my individual identity and my wealth. I utilized an offshore financial firm I had vetted years ago for a corporate client. I established a blind, multi-signature corporate trust. The beauty of this specific trust structure was its absolute opacity. Once the funds were transferred into the corporate entity Felicity, the individual effectively became penniless on paper. The trust required 3 separate layers of authentication to move a single dime, including a randomized rotating encryption sequence that even I could not memorize on my own. I meticulously initiated the wire transfers. I watched the progress bars on my screens, holding my breath as the massive sums of money moved across digital borders, leaving the vulnerable domestic accounts and vanishing into the impenetrable offshore vault. I did not stop there. I liquidated my individual stock portfolios, transferred the deeds of my premarital real estate investments into the trust, and locked down my credit profiles with heavy fraud alerts. I was systematically scrubbing my financial existence from the grid. By 2 in the afternoon, the process was complete. My personal accounts showed 0 balances. The offshore trust was fully funded and sealed behind military-grade firewalls. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, rolling my tense shoulders. A profound sense of relief washed over me. They could drug me every night of the week, they could pry my eyes open 1,000 times, but they would never be able to touch a single cent of my life's work. I had successfully insulated my entire empire from their greedy hands. I reached for my coffee mug, finally allowing myself to take a deep breath. Just as I took a sip, my cell phone buzzed loudly against the wooden desk. The sudden noise made me jump. I picked up the device and saw a text message from Derek lighting up the lock screen. "Hey, sweetheart," it read. "My father needs a quick short-term loan for a minor commercial permit issue. Log into your private portal and transfer $50,000 to our joint checking account right now. I will pay you back next week. Love you." I stared at the glowing screen, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. He had no idea he was demanding money from an empty vault. The financial war had officially begun. I typed a reply with steady fingers. I told him I was buried in an emergency audit meeting and would handle the transfer as soon as I got home. It was a calculated delay. I needed him to believe he still had control, to keep him completely unaware that his access to my funds had been permanently severed. Every second that passed was another brick in the wall I was building between my future and their greed. I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and prepared to return to the townhouse. I knew the evening would be tense. Derek would be waiting, expecting his money, expecting his submissive wife to blindly fund his family and their lavish lifestyle. But he was about to learn that the woman he had drugged and belittled was no longer playing the victim. I walked out of my office building, stepping into the cool Chicago air, ready to face the enemy in my very own home. The cruel games they played in the dark were over. I was bringing everything into the harsh, blinding, unforgiving light, and they would not see me coming until it was far too late to stop the absolute destruction I had meticulously planned for them all to face. Brittany's mouth twisted, as if my refusal were a personal insult, rather than a simple boundary. She flipped open the glossy brochure and shoved it across the marble island. The pages were crowded with photographs of candlelit terraces, white roses flown in from Ecuador, and a private mountain lodge overlooking Aspen. Every image had a handwritten number beside it in gold ink. "The 50,000 is only the first deposit," she said. "The venue requires 20,000 by 9 tomorrow morning. The florist wants 12. The photographer will not reserve the weekend without 8, and my dress alterations are another 10. I have already promised everyone the money is coming from the family account." "There is no family account with my name on it," I replied. "There is a joint household account for our mortgage and ordinary expenses. My separate savings are not a wedding fund." Brittany stared at me in theatrical disbelief. "Separate savings," she repeated, drawing out the words as though I had confessed to a crime. "Listen to yourself. You married into the Blackwell family, and you still speak like some frightened little clerk, protecting grocery money in an envelope?" Derek's expression hardened. "Do not make this uglier than it needs to be, Felicity. My sister has already signed contracts. If you embarrass her by withholding the deposit, the entire city will hear that my wife refused to support this family." I looked from him to Brittany, making my face show uncertainty rather than suspicion. "Why tomorrow morning?" I asked. "The wedding is months away. Why does every vendor suddenly need cash on the same day your father needs a $50,000 loan for a permit problem?" The question landed harder than I expected. Brittany stopped tapping her manicured nails against the brochure. Derek's jaw tightened. For one brief second, neither of them spoke. "It is none of your business," Derek said. "You are asking for my money?" I answered quietly. "That makes the deadline my business." Brittany rolled her eyes, but a nervous edge had entered her voice. "Dad is moving money between projects. One of the lenders is being difficult, and the family has to show liquidity before Friday. The wedding payment is simply part of the same transfer schedule." Derek turned on her so sharply that she flinched. "Brittany, stop talking!" The room went still. I lowered my eyes before either of them could notice the significance I had heard in her answer. Liquidity. Friday. A difficult lender. Those were not words connected to a wedding deposit. They were the language of a company scrambling to survive a deadline. I softened my voice. "I am not trying to create a problem. I only need to understand which account you expect me to use. My patent portfolio has compliance restrictions. A large transfer without documentation could trigger a review at my firm." That explanation was plausible enough to calm Brittany, but it made Derek angrier. He came around the island and stopped directly in front of me. "You keep hiding behind technical language because it makes you feel important," he said. "There is no review. There is no restriction. You press a button, the money moves, and my sister gets the wedding she deserves." He held out his hand. "Give me your phone. I will do it now." My pulse jumped, but I let only confusion reach my face. My phone is in my bag upstairs. Then bring it down. I glanced toward the staircase. I could feel Brittany watching me with open contempt, while Derek watched with something far more dangerous. His right hand was trembling beside his leg. He tucked it into his trouser pocket, but not before I saw the rapid movement of his thumb across the screen inside. A second later, his smartwatch lit with an incoming message. The preview showed only 6 words before he angled his wrist away. Need confirmation before the market opens. The sender was Richard. I forced myself not to react. Derek was not merely indulging his spoiled sister. He was under pressure from his father, and the exact amount he wanted for Brittany matched the amount he had demanded by text for the supposed permit issue. The wedding was camouflage. If I transferred the money, it would never reach an event planner. Brittany thrust her phone toward me, displaying an invoice with the vendor name cropped from the screen. I asked her to forward the document. She refused, claiming the planner protected privacy. That lie confirmed my suspicion. Vendors did not hide routing details from the person expected to send them $50,000. Derek reached for the phone and lowered it before I could read the account name. But I had noticed the destination was not in Colorado. Brittany snatched the brochure back and began listing everything she believed I owed her. She reminded me that Patricia had introduced me to charity committees, that Richard had allowed me to sit at his table, and that Derek's surname had supposedly opened doors my education never could. Each claim was more insulting than the last. She spoke as though 3 years of humiliation were a luxury service for which I had failed to pay. I listened without interrupting. Every few seconds, Derek checked his watch. His impatience was no longer about pride. It was fear. Finally, I placed both palms flat on the island. I cannot authorize a transfer from here, I said. The physical token is secured at my office, and the bank will not process a new beneficiary until I verify the routing information. Send me the planner's invoice and the contract. I will review them tonight. Brittany's face flushed. I do not need to submit paperwork to a cubicle worker. Then you do not need my $50,000. The words slipped out colder than I intended. Derek took one aggressive step toward me, and I immediately allowed my shoulders to fold inward, restoring the meek posture he expected. I am sorry, I whispered. I am still exhausted from last night. I do not want another argument. He studied me, deciding whether my resistance came from suspicion or simple fatigue. I gave him nothing to read. After several tense seconds, he changed tactics. His voice became warm and falsely patient. Of course, sweetheart. Take the night. But understand this clearly. If you refuse tomorrow, I will use the joint account and handle it myself. Marriage means I do not need permission every time this family has an obligation. I nodded as though chastened. Inside, I catalogued every detail: Richard's message, the Friday deadline, Derek's shaking hand, and Brittany's accidental reference to lender liquidity. I needed to know what happened the moment they believed I was out of the house. I needed their private words, not another polished lie delivered across a marble counter. I swallowed my rage. Let me think about it overnight, I murmured softly. I will transfer some funds tomorrow. I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving them to gloat over their perceived victory. That night, I waited until Derek was asleep. I slipped out from beneath the covers, moving through the dark house. I crept into his office and retrieved 2 micro cameras from my pocket. I installed the first lens inside the hollowed-out eye of a decorative bronze eagle sitting on his bookshelf, angling it perfectly to capture his computer screen. I mounted the second camera high up in the corner molding, ensuring I had a comprehensive view of the room and crystal-clear audio capabilities. By the time I returned to bed, the surveillance net was completely active. The drive to my corporate office felt different this morning, stripped of the usual dread and replaced by cold anticipation. I navigated Chicago traffic on autopilot, my mind replaying the arrogant smirk on Brittany's face and Derek's cruel tone. They believed I was nothing more than a subservient bank account, a quiet woman who would bow her head and fund their lavish lifestyle. I pulled into my reserved parking space in the underground garage, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath to steady my racing pulse. I stepped out of the car, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor, echoing the rigid determination building inside my chest. I swiped my security badge at the elevator, rode it up to the 42nd floor, and walked past the break room without offering greetings. I entered my corner office, closed the glass door, and turned the deadbolt until it locked with a sound. I walked over to the windows, lowered the motorized blinds to ensure privacy, and sat down at my workstation. It was time to watch the trap snap shut. I opened a secure browser window on my secondary monitor and entered the IP address for the surveillance network I had established. The high-definition video feed buffered before snapping into crystal-clear focus. The micro-cameras I had meticulously hidden inside the hollowed-out bronze eagle on the bookshelf and tucked away in the upper crown molding provided a flawless view of Derek's expansive home office. The room was a monument to his inflated ego, featuring a massive mahogany desk, walls lined with unread leather-bound books, and framed photographs of him, shaking hands with local politicians. I increased the audio gain on my secure headset, the sensitive microphones capturing the ambient silence of our empty townhouse. 10 minutes passed in agonizing anticipation. I sat perfectly still, my eyes glued to the digital feed. Finally, the heavy wooden door to the home office swung open. Derek strolled into the room, wearing casual loungewear, looking like a man without a single care. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, laughing loudly about an upcoming charity golf tournament with one of his elite friends. He casually tossed the phone onto the surface of the mahogany desk, ran a hand through his styled hair, and dropped heavily into his plush leather executive chair. He spun back and forth for a moment, exuding a toxic confidence that made my stomach churn. I leaned closer to my monitor, my breath hitching as he reached out and woke up his laptop. Thanks to the optimal angle of the bookshelf camera, I had a perfect magnified view of his bright screen. I watched him open his web browser and confidently navigate to our primary banking portal. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, typing in his username and password with practiced ease. He clicked the login button, unaware that the financial landscape he was about to enter had been fundamentally altered. I watched the cursor move across the screen as he selected the external transfer tab. He clicked the drop-down menu and selected our joint checking account as the funding source, the exact account I had secretly linked to my massive, now completely dissolved individual portfolio. He moved his cursor to the destination field, inputting the routing information for Brittany's luxury event planner in Aspen. In the amount box, he typed the number 5, followed by 4 zeros. $50,000 requested as casually as if he were ordering a cup of coffee. He hovered the mouse over the final authorize button. He did not pause to consider my feelings or my explicit refusal. With a lazy flick of his wrist, he clicked confirm. A bright red error message immediately populated the center of his laptop screen. I watched the live feed as Derek leaned forward, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He clicked the mouse again, assuming it was a simple connectivity issue. The bold red banner flashed once more, refusing to budge. I utilized my software to zoom in on the video feed, allowing me to read the exact text generated by the offshore security protocol I had established the previous afternoon. The prompt read, "Transaction denied. Corporate trust lock enabled. Available balance $0." Derek blinked hard, forcefully rubbing his eyes, as if he were hallucinating the text. He aggressively refreshed the web page, his movements growing sharper and more hurried. When the error persisted, he navigated directly back to the main account overview dashboard. I watched the healthy, vibrant color rapidly drain from his face as he stared at the screen. He was looking at a string of zeros where he fully expected to see a $2.5 million safety net. His reaction was not one of simple confusion. It was raw, unadulterated panic. Derek stood up so fast his heavy leather chair rolled backward and slammed violently into the drywall. He gripped his hair with both hands, his mouth falling open in a silent scream of disbelief. "No," he whispered, the sensitive microphone picking up the shaking rasp in his voice. "No, no, no, this is impossible." He slammed his fists down onto the solid mahogany desk, the heavy thud echoing through my office speakers and vibrating into my bones. He grabbed his wireless mouse and hurled it violently across the room, where it shattered into pieces against the baseboard. His breathing became ragged and uneven, echoing in the quiet room like a cornered animal. He swept his arm aggressively across the surface of the desk in a blind fit of rage. Expensive pens, legal pads, and customized coffee coasters flew through the air, crashing against the walls. His flailing hand caught the heavy engraved crystal Businessman of the Year award Patricia had bought for him the previous winter. The trophy tumbled over the edge of the wood and smashed into jagged, glittering pieces across the hardwood floor. Derek did not even look down at the destruction. He was hyperventilating, completely losing control of his carefully crafted, arrogant facade. He dropped heavily to his knees, ignoring the sharp shards of crystal surrounding his bare feet, and began digging frantically through the bottom drawer of his desk, searching for something to explain the nightmare. He quickly pulled out a thick leather-bound ledger, his hand shaking so violently he could barely turn the crisp white pages. He grabbed his cell phone from the floor, his fingers slipping on the smooth glass as he dialed a number from memory. He scrambled back to his feet, pacing the length of the room, stepping directly over the ruined crystal award. I held my breath, turning the volume up to maximum. The line connected, and I heard the deep, impatient voice of my father-in-law, Richard, echo from the speakerphone. Dad Derek gasped, sounding as though he were physically suffocating. "The money is gone. Felicity locked the accounts. We have absolutely nothing." Richard demanded to know what was happening. Derek leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting amid the debris. "I mean, it is gone," he sobbed, his composure entirely shattered. "The $2.5 million is completely gone." "Dad, what are we going to do? The margin call is due on Friday." "If we cannot move that cash into the development firm by the end of the week, the auditors are going to find out the commercial real estate collateral is entirely fabricated. If we do not get her money right now, we are both going to federal prison." Richard did not answer immediately. I heard a desk drawer slam through the speaker, followed by the rapid clatter of a keyboard. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost every trace of paternal restraint. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "If the accounts are locked, she is catching on. Do not ask her for another transfer. Do not threaten her about the money. You will only confirm her suspicions." Derek dragged a hand across his face. "Then what am I supposed to do? The lender will send auditors into the project files Friday morning. We need cash before the opening bell." "We moved to Plan B tonight." The words were quiet, but they changed the temperature in my office. I leaned closer to the surveillance monitor and increased the recording gain. Derek stopped pacing. "You said we would use that only if the biometric attempt failed completely." "It did fail completely," Richard snapped. "Call Dr. Aris. He already prepared the evaluation notes and the emergency affidavit. Your mother has been documenting Felicity's blackouts for months. You will tell him she has become paranoid, financially irrational, and dangerous to herself. Once she is under observation, you use the guardianship petition and the power of attorney package." A sick silence followed. Derek looked toward the closed office door, although no one was home to overhear him. "She will fight it," he whispered. "Felicity is not stupid." "Then make her fear the alternative. Eris will bring a sedative and explain that refusal proves instability. If she signs voluntarily, we avoid a public hearing. If she refuses, he signs the commitment affidavit and you request emergency control tomorrow morning. Either way, she is isolated from her employer, her phone, and every advisor who might help her. Derek sank into his chair. What about the corporate trust a power of attorney might not reach it? Richard cursed under his breath. We do not need to understand the structure tonight. We need her signature, her token, and time. Once she is confined, our lawyers can pressure the bank, challenge the transfer as evidence of incapacity, and freeze the entity before she moves anything else. Eris says a psychiatric record will make every accusation she raises look like a delusion. My stomach tightened. Their objective was no longer merely to steal money. They intended to erase my credibility before I could report them. Derek lowered his voice. What if she recorded the dinner, search the house after she signs? Take her phone, laptop, purse, and office keys. Your mother will keep her talking while Eris handles the paperwork. Do not leave her alone until the bedroom is locked. Richard paused, then added with chilling calm. And Derek, stop behaving like a frightened child. Your wife is one woman. We built this company over 40 years. By tomorrow, she will have no legal voice, no access to her money, and no one who believes her. Richard continued before Derek could respond. Photograph the rooms he ordered. Remove anything that contradicts the breakdown narrative, and tell Eris she threatened to disappear with the money. We need a clean timeline for the judge. No bruises, no neighbors, and no police call until she is inside the facility. Control the story before she can tell it herself. The line went dead. Derek remained seated among the shattered crystal, staring at the dark screen of his phone. Then he opened his contacts and selected Dr. Eris. I saw the name clearly on the hidden camera before he lifted the device to his ear. Doctor, he said when the call connected, my father says we are moving tonight. Bring the affidavit, the power of attorney, and enough medication to keep her calm. I saved 3 separate copies of the recording before Derek ended the call. One went to an encrypted cloud vault, one to a drive inside my office safe, and one to a timed archive that would release automatically if I failed to cancel it by morning. Only then did I let myself breathe. They believed Plan B would trap me inside a diagnosis they had manufactured. Instead, they had just recorded the blueprint of their conspiracy in their own voices. The chilling sound of Derek weeping through the surveillance audio washed over me, leaving a profound, icy silence in my office. Federal prison. The words hung in the air, answering every single question I had about their sudden, violent desperation. This was never just about funding Brittany and her ridiculous destination wedding. This was about survival. Richard had built a commercial real estate empire on a foundation of sand, and the tide was finally coming in. They needed my $2.5 million to artificially inflate their ledgers before the Securities and Exchange Commission tore their fraudulent world apart. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals were the most dangerous kind. I sat perfectly still for a long time, letting the immense magnitude of the situation settle into my bones. If I confronted them with this knowledge now, they would panic and escalate their attacks. People facing decades in a federal penitentiary did not simply apologize and walk away. I had to remain entirely invisible. I had to go back to that townhouse, look my husband in the eye, and pretend I was still the naive, exhausted wife they thought they could easily manipulate. I locked my workstation, gathered my coat, and walked out to my car. The drive back to Lincoln Park was agonizingly slow. Rush hour traffic choked the interstate, giving me entirely too much time to think. I gripped the leather steering wheel, mentally preparing myself for whatever Derek had planned next. He knew the money was locked. He knew he was out of time. According to the panicked phone call with his father, they were moving to their backup plan. The setting sun cast a bruised purple light across the sky as I navigated the familiar route home, my mind racing through every possible defensive scenario. I pulled into our driveway, the heavy dread sitting like a stone in my stomach. I noticed a sleek silver luxury sedan parked on the street directly in front of our house. It did not belong to Derek, and it certainly did not belong to Patricia. A cold knot formed tightly in my chest. I walked up the front steps, unlocked the door, and stepped into the foyer. The house was uncharacteristically quiet. There was no smell of dinner cooking, no sound of the television playing in the background. I hung my coat in the hall closet, my senses on high alert. "Felicity, is that you?" Derek called out. His voice came from the formal living room. It did not sound angry or panicked. It sounded weak, fragile, and thick with unshed tears. I walked through the archway and stopped dead in my tracks. The scene before me was meticulously orchestrated. Derek was sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, his face buried in his hands. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, projecting the image of a man utterly exhausted by worry and grief. Patricia sat in the armchair across from him, her posture rigid, her face arranged into a masterclass mask of deep maternal sorrow. But it was the third person in the room that made my blood run cold. Standing near the marble fireplace was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s. He wore a pristine, custom-tailored charcoal suit that screamed expensive authority. He carried a classic leather medical bag, which rested ominously on the glass coffee table in front of him. His eyes were dark, clinical, and completely devoid of human warmth. Derek looked up, his eyes red and remarkably glassy. He stood up slowly, walking toward me with his hands raised in a placating, gentle gesture, as if approaching a wild, unpredictable animal. "Thank God you are home, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice trembling perfectly. "We have been so incredibly worried about you." I forced a look of absolute confusion onto my face, shrinking back slightly toward the hallway. "Worried about me? Derek, what is going on? Who is this man in our house?" Patricia let out a heavy, tragic sigh. "It is time to stop running from the truth, Felicity. We love you too much to watch you destroy your own mind." Derek took another step forward, refusing to break eye contact. "Sweetheart, please listen to me. I love you more than anything in this world. But your behavior lately has become completely unmanageable. The extreme paranoia, the constant exhaustion, the memory loss. You are not yourself anymore." I stared at him, genuinely horrified by the flawless execution of his performance. Just hours ago, he was smashing Crystal Awards and screaming about federal indictments. Now he was playing the role of the heartbroken spouse with terrifying sociopathic accuracy. "I have been working hard," I said, keeping my voice small and properly defensive. "I am just tired. You know, we are in the middle of a massive quarterly audit at the firm." "It is more than just being tired," Derek countered, his tone dripping with fake, sickening sympathy. "You collapsed at my mother's dinner table last night. You had absolutely no memory of the conversations we had. And today, I tried to log into our household accounts to pay some simple contractor invoices, and I found out you completely locked me out. You drained our joint accounts and hid the money behind layers of corporate encryption. Felicity, you are acting like a lunatic. You are treating your own family like we are actively trying to hurt you." Patricia stood up, smoothing the skirt of her designer dress. "It is a textbook psychiatric break," she said, her voice soft but echoing with pure malice. "Dr. Eris has seen this 1,000 times in high-stress corporate women." I looked at the stranger standing by the fireplace. "Dr. Eris," I repeated, letting my voice waver just enough to sound terrified. The man offered a tight, practiced smile. "I am Dr. Eris," he said, his tone smooth and commanding. "I am a private psychiatric specialist. Richard asked me to come by and evaluate the situation. Derek has detailed your recent behavioral patterns to me. the sudden blackouts, the extreme financial paranoia, the social withdrawal. These are classic, undeniable symptoms of a severe psychiatric breakdown, quite possibly early onset schizophrenia. I felt a physical chill spread through my veins. They were not just trying to steal my money anymore. They were trying to completely erase my credibility, my autonomy, and my freedom. By painting me as a paranoid schizophrenic, they could invalidate any legal claims I made against them. If I told the police they drugged me, it would be written off as a paranoid delusion. If I accused Richard of running a Ponzi scheme, it would be dismissed as a manic hallucination. "I am not crazy," I whispered, letting genuine fear bleed into my voice. "I did not do anything wrong. I just wanted to secure my savings." Derek stepped close enough to invade my personal space. He reached out and gently stroked my hair. The physical contact made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stand perfectly still. "We know you are not doing this on purpose, sweetheart," he murmured softly. "Your brain is just sick right now. You need serious medical help, and we are going to make sure you get it. But you need to let me take care of the stressful things so you can focus entirely on healing." He stepped back, turning his attention to Dr. Eris. The doctor stepped forward, moving with a quiet, predatory grace. He unlatched the brass clasps on his leather medical bag. The heavy clicks sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He reached inside and slowly pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder, placing it deliberately on the glass coffee table. Then he reached back into the bag. My breath hitched in my throat as he pulled out a sealed, sterile syringe, the clear liquid inside catching the light from the chandelier overhead. He laid the syringe right next to the thick stack of legal documents. "We have two paths forward tonight," Felicity Dr. Eris stated calmly, entirely unfazed by the deeply criminal nature of his actions. "Option 1 is the voluntary path. You sign this comprehensive power of attorney document granting Derek temporary legal control over your medical and financial decisions while you undergo a voluntary inpatient psychiatric evaluation at my private facility." I stared at the needle, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "And option 2? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Patricia smiled a cold, triumphant expression that matched the dead look in her eyes. "Option 2, she said, is that Dr. Eris signs an emergency medical affidavit right now, declaring you an immediate, violent danger to yourself and others. We will have you chemically sedated, involuntarily committed to a state psychiatric ward, and Derek will be granted emergency guardianship by a judge first thing tomorrow morning." I slowly stared at the three of them, my mind racing as the true horror of their plan crystallized. If I screamed, if I fought back, if I tried to run for the front door, they would simply use my panic as undeniable proof of my instability. By the time I could convince a judge I was sane, Derek would have legally drained every cent I owned to save his father's collapsing empire. She quickly pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers and dropped them onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. She then slid the document across the smooth surface until it rested precisely in front of me. She placed a gold-plated fountain pen right on top of the signature line. "Let Derek manage your affairs while you seek inpatient treatment. But if you do not sign it right now, Dr. Eris is prepared to sign an affidavit declaring you a danger to yourself, and we will have you committed involuntarily to a state facility. The choice is entirely yours." It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They wanted to legally own me. I looked down at the document. The bold black letters across the top read, "Durable Power of Attorney for Financial and Medical Management." It granted Derek absolute authority over my bank accounts, my real estate, my investments, and my healthcare directives. It was a blank check to destroy me and erase everything I had worked for since my career began. They expected me to fight back, to scream, and refused, giving them the perfect excuse to proceed with option 2 and have me committed. He looked up at me with those perfectly practiced, tear-filled eyes. "Please, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Do not make us do this the hard way. Just sign the paper for me right now. Let me take the heavy burden off your shoulders. I will handle the bills, the accounts, the business. You just need to focus on resting your mind. We will get through this dark period together, I promise you." I stared into his eyes, searching for even a tiny fraction of the man I thought I had married. There was nothing there. I could see the cold, frantic greed burning in his pupils. He was desperate. They were all desperate. The margin call was coming and they needed my money to stay out of federal prison. A sudden, brilliant realization washed over me, cutting through the genuine terror of the moment. I did not need to fight them. The document Patricia had slid across the table was completely and utterly worthless. It granted Derek power of attorney over Felicity the individual. But Felicity the individual no longer had a single dime to her name. I had legally dissolved my entire personal estate into an offshore corporate trust yesterday afternoon, shielding every single asset behind an impenetrable rotating encryption wall. They could take this piece of paper to every bank in Chicago, and they would be met with the same impenetrable corporate walls. If I showed any defiance, any hint of calculation, they would suspect I had outmaneuvered them. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted. I needed to give them a total, crushing victory. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing inward as if the weight of their accusations had finally broken my spirit. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a steady stream of tears to spill hot and fast down my cheeks. A ragged, ugly sob tore from my throat. I covered my face with my trembling hands, rocking back and forth, slowly, on the edge of the velvet sofa to sell the illusion of a total, crushing breakdown. "I am so sorry," I wailed, letting my voice pitch upward into a hysterical, broken register. "I am so sorry, Derek. I really do not know what is happening to me." I peered through my fingers, watching their reactions. Derek let out a long, heavy exhale, his shoulders dropping in profound relief. He reached up and pulled my hands away from my face, gripping my fingers tightly. I continued to hyperventilate, shaking my head wildly from side to side in mock despair. "I have just been so stressed," I gasped, my chest heaving with fake, desperate panic. "The audits at work, the late nights, my brain just feels like it is constantly buzzing. I am so paranoid, Derek. I locked all the accounts because I was scared. I am so scared of my own mind." Patricia exchanged a swift, triumphant look with Dr. Eris. The doctor subtly pushed his medical bag closed, the threat of the syringe no longer necessary now that the target was complying. "It is okay, Felicity," Derek cooed, stroking my arm with sickening tenderness. "It is the paranoia talking. But you are going to be completely fine. I am going to step up as your husband and take over everything for you. I will handle the locked accounts. I will handle the firm. You just need to let go." I fell forward, burying my face in his shoulder, sobbing loudly into the expensive fabric of his suit. "Please do not let them take me to a state hospital," I begged, my voice muffled against his chest. "Please, Derek, I will do whatever you want. I will go to the private clinic. I just want to feel normal again. Please forgive me for being so crazy." He rubbed my back, a gesture so artificially comforting, it took every ounce of my willpower not to violently push him away. "I forgive you, sweetheart. Of course I forgive you. Now just sit up and sign the paper. Let me take the wheel." I slowly pulled back, wiping my tear-streaked face with the back of my trembling hand. I looked down at the durable power of attorney document lying flat on the cold glass coffee table. My hand shook violently, a deliberate theatrical tremor, as I reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, letting out one final shuddering sob before I pressed the nib to the thick paper. I signed my name on the bottom line. I flipped to the second page and signed again, then initialed the financial release clauses on the third page in silence. When I finished the final signature, Patricia immediately stepped forward and snatched the document from the table. She handed the paperwork to Dr. Aris, who pulled a notary stamp from his pocket and officially witnessed and sealed the signatures, validating the transfer of power. I slumped back against the sofa cushions, staring blankly at the wall portraying the empty, defeated shell of a woman who had just signed her entire life away. I felt Derek stand up, looking down at me with an expression of supreme, arrogant victory. They had won. They had manipulated, threatened, and cornered me into surrendering the keys to my kingdom. But as I sat there tasting the salty tears on my lips and listening to the rustle of the legal documents being secured in Patricia's designer handbag, a cold, fierce satisfaction bloomed deep inside my chest. I had not surrendered anything. I had just handed them a useless piece of paper. They thought they had captured the queen, but they were holding an empty cage, and they were about to walk straight into the most devastating trap I had ever built. Derek crouched in front of me and lifted my chin with 2 fingers. His smile was soft enough to fool a stranger, but triumph glittered behind it. "You made the right choice," he said. "I knew you would eventually trust me." He pressed a patronizing kiss to my forehead. I kept my eyes unfocused and allowed my body to sag against the cushions. Patricia was already photographing each signed page with her phone, while Dr. Aris checked the notary seal twice. "We should celebrate," Patricia said. "Richard has been waiting for confirmation." They moved into the foyer, speaking freely, because they believed my mind had collapsed. Derek called his father on speaker. "She signed everything," he announced. "Aris witnessed it. We will file the guardianship petition first thing in the morning." Richard's relieved laugh carried across the room. "Excellent. Submit the banking package tonight. Once the transfer clears, move the money directly into the development account. Do not let it sit anywhere her compliance department can trace." Patricia opened the front door and stepped onto the driveway. Through the narrow gap between the curtains, I watched her remove a chilled bottle of champagne from the rear of her SUV. Derek joined her beneath the porch light, while Dr. Aris packed the syringe and medical forms into his leather bag. Patricia popped the cork, and foam spilled over her manicured fingers. "To family," she declared. "To Friday." Derek answered, raising a glass. Their laughter floated through the glass. They were celebrating the theft of my life before the bank had transferred $1. Dr. Aris returned long enough to inspect me. He waved 2 fingers in front of my face and asked whether I felt sleepy. I nodded weakly. Satisfied, he told Derek that emotional exhaustion would support the psychiatric narrative. Derek took my phone from the coffee table, emptied my purse, and searched every pocket for the token key. When he found nothing, Patricia told him not to worry. They would search my office after the guardianship order. They had taken my primary phone and expected my laptop to be at the office. Neither knew about the encrypted backup handset sewn behind the lining of my travel bag, exactly where Derek had never bothered to search. Derek guided me upstairs with one hand locked around my elbow. At the master bedroom door, he removed the interior key and placed my phone in his pocket. "Rest, sweetheart," he said. "Tomorrow I will handle everything." The lock turned from the hallway. I waited until their footsteps retreated, then crossed to the window and looked down. Patricia, Derek, and Dr. Aris were still beside the vehicles, finishing their champagne while reviewing the signed pages beneath the driveway lights. I opened the secure trust application on my hidden backup phone. The entity name, trustees, and 3-party authorization remained unchanged. The power of attorney covered only assets held personally in my legal name. It gave Derek authority over a financial ghost. Down below, Patricia raised her empty glass toward the house. I closed the application, erased the access log, and slipped the backup phone into the lining of my duffel bag. Let them celebrate. Every minute they believed they had won gave me another minute to escape and build the case that would bury them. I sat on the velvet sofa long after the front door clicked shut. I listened intently as the heavy deadbolt turned, locking me inside my own home. Derek had actually locked me in the master suite, treating me like a prisoner in a gilded cage. I waited in absolute silence, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to hear the sounds of their departure. After what felt like an eternity, the low hum of Patricia's luxury SUV drifted up from the driveway, followed immediately by the familiar roar of Derek's sports car. They were heading downtown to file the fraudulent power of attorney, completely convinced they had finally broken me. The moment the sound of their engines faded into the distance, my entire demeanor shifted. The trembling, terrified woman vanished, replaced by a cold and calculated professional. I stood up from the sofa and moved quickly through the bedroom. I had no time to waste. I grabbed a single, unassuming duffel bag from the back of my closet and began packing with ruthless efficiency. I did not take clothes or jewelry. I packed my encrypted backup drives, my secondary laptop, a series of untraceable prepaid debit cards, and my physical passport. I zipped the bag shut and walked over to the large bay window that overlooked the side garden. The first floor of our townhouse was elevated, but the drop was manageable. I unlatched the window lock, pushed the heavy glass pane upward, and tossed my duffel bag into the soft, manicured bushes below. I climbed over the sill, my feet finding a precarious hold on the brick ledge, and dropped down onto the damp grass. I bagged and hurried down the narrow alleyway toward the street. I walked 3 blocks before calling a rideshare, intentionally avoiding my own vehicle so Derek could not track its GPS location. I directed the driver to a modest apartment complex in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. My best friend Monica lived on the 4th floor. Monica was a brilliant software developer I had known since my freshman year of college, and she was the only person in the world I trusted with my life. She had always been skeptical of Derek and his perfectly manicured family, sensing a coldness beneath their polished exterior. When she opened her apartment door and saw me standing in the hallway with my duffel bag and my pale, determined face, she did not ask a single unnecessary question. She simply stepped aside, ushered me into her living room, and locked the deadbolt behind me. "I need your secure network," I told her, dropping my bag onto her couch. "I need a clean, untraceable connection, and I need it right now." Monica nodded, immediately moving toward her home office setup. She pulled a spare Ethernet cable from a drawer and handed it to me. "I have a dedicated line running through an encrypted virtual private network routed out of Switzerland," she said, her voice steady and supportive. "Nobody is going to trace a single packet of data back to this apartment." "What did they do, Felicity?" "They tried to take everything," I replied, sitting down at her kitchen island and opening my laptop. "But I am going to burn their entire empire to the ground before they even realize the match has been lit." I connected my laptop to Monica's secure network and initiated my professional cybersecurity diagnostic tools. The interface bloomed across my screen, a comforting sea of black and green command lines. For the past 24 hours, I had been the victim of psychological torture, but sitting behind this keyboard, typing lines of code with rapid precision, I was a predator. I pulled up the digital audio and video logs I had captured from the hidden cameras inside Derek's home office. I needed a way into his personal network, and he had foolishly provided the key during his chaotic meltdown. When Derek had frantically called his father about the locked accounts, the surveillance audio had captured the exact tone of his voice. But more importantly, the camera, hidden in the bookshelf, had recorded a perfect, unobstructed view of his hands flying across his keyboard as he desperately tried to access the offshore portal. I ran the video feed through a specialized motion tracking software program I had designed for corporate audits. The software analyzed the exact placement and timing of Derek's keystrokes, effectively reverse engineering his master password. It took the program less than 3 minutes to spit out a 12-character alphanumeric sequence. I opened a secure terminal and navigated to the login portal for Derek's personal desktop. I typed in the password and the system accepted it immediately. But I knew Derek had a two-factor authentication protocol enabled. He would receive a text message with a temporary security code the moment I tried to log in, which would alert him to the intrusion. I smiled grimly. I had anticipated this exact obstacle. Using a secondary script I had deployed earlier that morning, I intercepted the authentication message directly from the cellular provider's network tower before it could ever reach Derek's physical device. The 6-digit code appeared on my screen in plain text. I entered the numbers, bypassed the final security gate, and gained total, undetected access to my husband's private digital life. I immediately began scanning his internal hard drive, searching for any connection to his father's commercial real estate firm. It did not take long to find the breadcrumbs. Derek was not just a supportive son. He was deeply entangled in Richard's corporate infrastructure. I found a secure file transfer protocol link buried inside a seemingly innocuous folder labeled Golf Memberships. It was a direct, encrypted tunnel connecting Derek's laptop straight into the central server of his father's company. I clicked the link, bypassing the initial gateway, using Derek's cached credentials. Suddenly, my screen turned a dark warning red. A massive, complex firewall blocked my path. This was not a standard off-the-shelf security measure. Richard had paid a significant amount of money to protect his company's internal data. The firewall was designed to automatically detect unauthorized scraping tools and immediately sever the connection, while logging the intruder's location. I felt a bead of sweat roll down the back of my neck. If I triggered the defense mechanism, Richard's IT team would be alerted, and they would scrub the servers clean before I could gather the evidence I needed to prove their criminal activity. I needed to move with absolute surgical precision. I paused, closing my eyes and visualizing the architecture of a high-level corporate security system. Men like Richard were arrogant. They believed their wealth and power made them untouchable. They paid for expensive digital walls, but they always, without fail, demanded an easy way for themselves to bypass the inconvenience of their own security measures. Arrogance always breeds laziness. I began running a gentle, passive scan along the perimeter of the firewall, looking for anomalies in the code. I spent a grueling 45 minutes analyzing thousands of lines of data, my eyes burning from the harsh glare of the monitor. Monica stood silently behind me, bringing me cups of black coffee and staying completely out of my way. Then I saw it. A tiny, nearly imperceptible irregularity in the administrative access logs. Richard's IT team had built a flawless wall, but Richard had forced them to install a hidden back door so he could access the financial ledgers from his mobile phone while traveling. The back door was protected by a simple, outdated encryption standard that practically invited intrusion. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. I targeted the back door, deploying a silent decryption algorithm that carefully unraveled the weak security lock without triggering any internal alarms. I watched the progress bar inch forward, my heart pounding in my ears. 90%, 95%. A soft chime emanated from my computer speakers. The red warning screen vanished, replaced by the sprawling, unprotected directory of Richard's entire commercial real estate firm. I had successfully breached the mainframe. I was staring directly at the beating, corrupt heart of their family empire, and I was about to expose every single dark, festering secret they had ever tried to hide. The directory unfolded across my dual monitors in a complex, sprawling tree of encrypted folders and subdirectories. I did not waste a single second celebrating the breach. My eyes scanned the file architecture, my mind instantly shifting into the cold, analytical framework of a senior forensic auditor. This was my domain. I knew exactly where corrupt men hid their sins, because I spent my entire professional life hunting them down for a living. I instructed my software to begin mirroring the entire drive onto my encrypted external hard drive. If Richard's IT team detected my presence and severed the connection, I needed to ensure I had absolute copies of every single ledger email and contract before the door slammed shut. Monica placed a fresh, steaming mug of black coffee on the desk beside my hand. She did not ask questions. She simply pulled up a chair in the corner of the room, wrapped herself in a thick fleece blanket, and stood watch while I went to war. The next 48 hours blurred into a relentless, sleepless marathon of data extraction and financial decryption. I drank coffee until my hands literally shook, my eyes burning from the harsh blue light of the monitors. But the sheer horrifying magnitude of what I was uncovering fueled me with an endless supply of adrenaline. I was not just looking at a struggling business. I was looking at a breathtakingly arrogant criminal enterprise. Richard had spent decades cultivating the image of a titan in the Chicago commercial real estate market. The reality, buried deep within his private double-booked accounting ledgers, was nothing more than a spectacular illusion. His firm was entirely hollow. I traced the capital flow from project to project, watching the money move through a dizzying labyrinth of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. He was not developing new properties. He was taking massive loans from institutional investors for new projects and using that cash to pay off the interest on his older, failing properties. It was the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme, and the foundation was currently crumbling beneath his feet. The margin call Derek had panicked about on the phone was the final fatal blow. A major institutional lender had called in a $50 million note, and Richard did not have even a fraction of the liquidity required to satisfy the demand. But Richard's financial crimes were just the beginning of the rot. I pivoted my search, running specific queries for Derek's name across the internal communications and private transaction logs. My husband worked as a senior wealth manager for an elite boutique firm downtown, handling the portfolios of Chicago's wealthiest families. I found a hidden folder labeled Client Distributions. I ran a cross-reference algorithm matching the outgoing wire transfers from Derek's client accounts to the incoming deposits in Richard's shell companies. The results made my stomach turn. Derek was actively embezzling funds from his own high-net-worth clients. He was targeting the accounts of elderly widows and long-term trusts that rarely scrutinized their monthly statements. He would siphon off a few $100,000 at a time, classifying the theft as high-risk alternative investments in the official client reports. In reality, he was funneling that stolen money directly into his father's sinking commercial properties, desperately trying to plug the holes in the sinking ship. He had completely abandoned his fiduciary duty, gambling with other people's life savings to protect his family's fabricated legacy. Derek was looking at decades in a federal penitentiary for the sheer scale of the theft I was mapping on my screen. As the second night bled into the early hours of the morning, I dug deeper into the family's expenditure logs. I needed to know exactly where the rest of the embezzled money was bleeding out. I found an entire subdirectory dedicated to Patricia's personal finances. My mother-in-law presented herself as a pillar of high society, a woman who spent her days organizing charity galas and critiquing my modest upbringing. The financial reality was pathetic and desperate. Patricia had a catastrophic gambling addiction. I reviewed the transaction histories, my jaw tightening as I traced millions of dollars flowing out of the corporate accounts and directly into high-stakes offshore casinos and private exclusive poker rings. She was bleeding the family dry. But the most horrifying discovery was how she was funding her addiction once Richard's cash flow started to dry up. I opened a series of loan origination documents and found her signature. Patricia had been taking out massive, high-interest loans from predatory private lenders. To secure these loans, she had been pledging Richard's commercial properties as collateral. The problem was, she was pledging properties that the firm did not actually own, or properties that were already leveraged to the absolute maximum. She was committing aggressive bank fraud to cover her gambling debts, forging property deeds and corporate resolutions with reckless abandon. They were all in on it. The entire family was a syndicate of white-collar criminals drowning in a sea of their own arrogance and greed. And I, the quiet, boring woman they thought they could easily manipulate, was holding the blueprint to their total destruction. My vision blurred slightly from exhaustion, but I pushed through, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I compiled the evidence. I organized the data into pristine, cross-referenced digital folders, creating a clear, undeniable narrative of their collective crimes. I had the bank routing numbers, the forged signatures, the internal emails where Richard explicitly directed Derek to siphon client funds, and the ledgers proving Patricia's fraudulent loans. It was a masterpiece of forensic auditing, but I needed the final fatal nail in their coffin. I needed the direct link between their corporate crimes and their physical attack on me. I navigated to the pending transaction queue for Richard's primary holding account. I filtered the search results by date, isolating the activity from the past 48 hours. My heart stopped dead in my chest. There it was. I opened a pending wire transfer request that had been initiated early that morning, shortly after Derek and Patricia had left my townhouse with the coerced power of attorney document. The request was a demand to pull $2.5 million from the offshore corporate trust I had established. They were trying to rip the money directly out of my hands to cover Richard's margin call. I pulled up the authorization attachments submitted alongside the wire request. I stared at the high-resolution scan of the durable power of attorney document I had signed under extreme duress. There was my trembling signature, Patricia's handwriting filling out the executor details, and Dr. Aris and his fraudulent notary seal. They had actually submitted the coerced document to an international banking institution in a desperate attempt to authorize the transfer. By submitting that specific document across state and international digital lines to initiate a fraudulent transfer of wealth, they had crossed a massive, irreversible threshold. This was no longer just a domestic dispute or a case of local embezzlement. They had used a document obtained through physical coercion and chemical assault to attempt the theft of millions of dollars. It was the textbook definition of federal wire fraud. I sat back in Monica's spare desk chair, my chest heaving as the adrenaline surged through my exhausted body. I had them. I had absolutely every single piece of the puzzle. I had the audio recording of the assault, the toxicology report proving the drugging, the internal ledgers proving the Ponzi scheme and the embezzlement, and now the digital footprint of their attempted federal wire fraud. I saved the final batch of documents to my encrypted hard drive, safely ejecting the device and slipping it into my pocket. I cleanly severed my connection to Richard's mainframe, utilizing a proprietary scrubbing tool to wipe any trace of my digital intrusion from their servers. They would have absolutely no idea I had been inside their system until the federal agents were kicking down their front doors. Monica walked into the room carrying a plate of toast and a fresh bottle of water. She set them down next to my keyboard and rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered, looking at the dark screen of my secondary laptop. "You have everything you need to get a judge to grant an immediate, ironclad divorce. You can walk away from him tomorrow." I looked up at her, my eyes burning from the lack of sleep, but my mind operating with a terrifying, crystal-clear focus. A divorce would just be a piece of paper severing a marriage that never actually existed. It would free me from Derek, but it would not stop them from destroying the lives of the innocent clients he was actively robbing. It would not penalize Patricia for forging corporate documents to fuel her catastrophic gambling addiction. And it certainly would not hold Richard accountable for building a multi-million-dollar real estate empire entirely out of smoke mirrors and stolen retirement funds. A simple divorce was what a victim would seek. I was not a victim anymore. I reached for my encrypted hard drive, plugged it back into the secure terminal, and opened a fresh blank document. I spent the next 10 hours transforming the raw, chaotic data I had scraped from their servers into a pristine, beautifully organized narrative of total corporate corruption. I did not just throw financial ledgers into a folder. I built a comprehensive 300-page digital dossier. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, designed to be so irrefutable that any federal prosecutor could walk into a courtroom tomorrow and secure a conviction without a single moment of hesitation. I started with the foundation of Richard's commercial real estate empire. I mapped out the entire Ponzi structure, creating clear visual flowcharts that trace the movement of capital from the new institutional investors directly into the accounts meant to cover the failing legacy properties. I highlighted the exact dates and times where the internal ledgers diverged from the official tax filings, creating a massive, undeniable trail of corporate fraud. Then I moved on to Derek. I created a dedicated section for his boutique wealth management firm. I matched the outbound wire transfers from his elderly clients' trust accounts directly to the inbound deposits in Richard's offshore shell companies. I included the internal emails where Derek explicitly admitted to classifying these thefts as high-risk alternative investments to avoid raising red flags with the firm's compliance officers. Every stolen dollar was accounted for, tracked, and verified. Next came Patricia. I compiled the forged property deeds and the fraudulent loan origination documents she had used to secure cash from predatory lenders. I matched those exact loan amounts to the wire transfers sent to the offshore casinos and private poker rings. I built a timeline proving she was actively leveraging properties the company did not even own to feed her catastrophic gambling addiction. And finally, I documented their assault on me. I attached the audio files of Derek and Richard discussing the sedative dosages and their backup plan to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility in Wisconsin. I included the toxicology report proving I had been drugged with a powerful sedative. To tie it all together, I attached the high-resolution scans of the durable power of attorney document they had coerced me into signing, alongside the digital logs proving they had immediately attempted to use that fraudulent document to wire $2.5 million out of my locked accounts across state and international lines. It was the definitive proof of federal wire fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy. When I typed the final sentence of the executive summary, my hands were steady. The dossier was complete. It was 300 pages of pure, unadulterated ruin for the entire family. I exported the entire package into a single, heavily encrypted digital file. Monica watched in silence as I opened a secure, untraceable communication portal. "You are really going to do it," she said softly. "You are going to burn their entire lives to the ground." I nodded, my eyes locked on the screen. Years ago, before I met Derek, I had worked as a lead forensic consultant on a massive corporate embezzlement case in Chicago. During that investigation, I had worked closely with a senior special agent in the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had maintained a quiet, professional, mutual respect over the years. I knew he was a man who lived for cases exactly like this one. I typed out a brief, highly professional message to his direct, secure email address. The message contained a brief overview of the Ponzi scheme, the ongoing embezzlement of high-net-worth individuals, and the federal wire fraud. I attached the encrypted dossier and provided the complex decryption key in a secondary, timed message. I also copied the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, ensuring that the financial regulators would be moving in lockstep with federal law enforcement. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a profound sense of finality. I clicked the send button. The encrypted package vanished into the digital ether, hurtling toward the servers of the federal government. There was no going back. The gears of justice had been set into motion, and they would grind forward with ruthless, unstoppable efficiency. I closed the laptop and pushed it away, leaning back in the chair and stretching my aching muscles. It was late afternoon, and the gray light of the Chicago skyline filtered through Monica's apartment windows. I needed to sleep, but my mind was still racing, calculating the timeline of the fallout. The federal agents would need time to review the dossier, to verify the routing numbers, and to secure the necessary warrants from a federal judge. Given the sheer scale of the theft and the explicit evidence of ongoing wire fraud, I knew they would move aggressively. They would want to freeze the assets and secure the servers before Richard or Derek had any opportunity to destroy the evidence or flee the jurisdiction. I estimated they would need roughly 24 hours to assemble a strike team and coordinate the raids. That timeline presented a unique, poetic opportunity. I pulled my personal cell phone from my duffel bag and powered it on. A flood of missed calls and text messages populated the screen. Dozens of them were from Derek, his tone shifting wildly from manufactured concern to thinly veiled anger. There were messages from Patricia demanding to know where I had gone. I ignored them all. I opened my personal email inbox. Sitting near the top was a formal digital invitation I received weeks ago. It requested my presence at the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel tomorrow evening. It was the official celebration for the 40th anniversary of Richard's commercial real estate firm. The entire family would be there, dressed in formal wear, shaking hands with the very investors they were actively robbing. Richard was scheduled to give a keynote address celebrating his legacy. Derek and Patricia would be standing right beside him, projecting the image of flawless, untouchable wealth. It was a party funded entirely by stolen money and deceit. I clicked RSVP. I selected the option for attending, confirming that Felicity would indeed be present. I was going to the gala, and I knew exactly how the night would end. The heavy oak doors of the Drake Hotel Grand Ballroom swung open, revealing a breathtaking sea of Chicago's corporate elite. Waiters in immaculate white tuxedo jackets moved smoothly through the throng of back-slapping billionaires carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne. A string quartet played a lively classical piece, nearly drowned out by the booming laughter and the constant rhythmic clinking of expensive glassware. It was a celebration of monumental success, a 40th anniversary gala funded entirely by stolen money. Desperate fraud and the life savings of innocent people. I stepped over the threshold, letting the heavy doors close silently behind me. For years, I had attended these mandatory family functions, dressed in the conservative, understated outfits Patricia had deemed appropriate for a woman of my modest background. They had always expected me to blend into the wallpaper, to stand quietly beside Derek, and to project the image of a grateful, unassuming wife who was lucky to have been allowed into their orbit. Tonight, I was not blending in. I was wearing a custom, floor-length designer gown, crafted from deep emerald silk that clung to my frame with architectural precision. It featured a daring, asymmetrical neckline and a plunging back that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It was the kind of dress that demanded attention, a garment of pure, unapologetic power that I had commissioned in Paris 2 years ago, but had never dared to wear. They thought I was a fragile, broken woman who could not afford to buy a cup of coffee without their permission. They had no idea I had paid for this dress in cash from an offshore account they did not even know existed. I descended the staircase, my heels sinking silently into the plush crimson carpet. Conversations faltered and died out as people noticed my solitary arrival. I kept my chin perfectly level, my posture flawless, projecting a cold, diamond-hard confidence. I caught the eye of a senior partner at Derek's firm, a man who had ignored me at every previous holiday party. His jaw literally dropped as his eyes traveled over my emerald gown. I offered him a sharp, knowing smile and continued walking directly into the heart of the room. I navigated through the crowd, gliding past groups of investors who were eagerly discussing Richard's fabricated expansion plans. I scanned the room, my eyes sweeping over the sea of tailored suits until I found the people I was looking for. They were standing near the front of the room, right beside the large podium where Richard was scheduled to give his keynote address. Patricia stood with Brittany, Derek's obnoxious younger sister who had flown in from New York specifically for the event. Patricia was holding a martini glass, her posture rigid with tension. I watched as her gaze swept idly across the ballroom, scanning the crowd for important people to flatter. Then her eyes locked onto me. I saw the physical shock ripple through her body. Her hand jerked, sloshing a clear drop of her martini over the rim of her glass. Her eyes widened, taking in my emerald gown, my perfectly styled hair, and the utter lack of fear on my face. She quickly leaned toward Brittany, whispering frantically into her daughter's ear. I was close enough to read the vicious, triumphant shape of her lips, even over the ambient noise of the gala. "Do not worry about her," Patricia hissed, her eyes glaring daggers at me. "She is completely delusional. Tomorrow morning, the power of attorney clears the bank, Derek takes control of everything, and we are having her locked in a sanitarium by noon. Just ignore her manic little display." Brittany raised her glass in a mocking toast, fully believing her mother's arrogant assessment. They truly thought my presence here was the desperate final act of a woman losing her mind. Then Derek saw me. He had been standing by the bar, schmoozing with one of the elderly clients he was actively embezzling from. He turned around, a fake, practiced smile plastered across his face, and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened in absolute horror. He knew I was supposed to be locked inside the master bedroom of our townhouse, heavily sedated, and waiting for the morning transport to the psychiatric facility. Seeing me standing in the middle of the Drake Hotel ballroom, looking more powerful and composed than he had ever seen me, completely shattered his reality. The panic on his face was immediate and visceral. He excused himself abruptly, leaving his wealthy client mid-sentence, and began pushing his way through the crowd toward me. His face was flushed dark red, a mixture of profound embarrassment and rising uncontrollable rage. He shoved past a waiter, nearly knocking over a tray of empty glasses, his eyes fixed on me with a terrifying, predatory intensity. "Felicity," he hissed as he closed the final few feet between us. His voice was a low, dangerous whisper intended only for my ears. "What the hell do you think you are doing here? How did you get out of the house?" I took a slow, elegant sip of my champagne. I looked at him with absolute indifference, as if he were a stranger. "I decided I wanted a glass of champagne, Derek," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. "The vintage here is so much better than what you keep at the house." His jaw clenched so hard, I thought I might hear his teeth crack. He stepped dangerously close to me, his chest nearly brushing against my shoulder. He reached out his large hand, snapping forward to grab my upper arm in a tight, bruising grip. "You are coming with me, right now," he ordered, his voice dropping into a guttural, threatening register. "You are having a severe manic episode. I am taking you out the side door before you embarrass this entire family any further. If you make a single sound, I swear to God, I will drag you out by your hair." He expected me to shrink back. He expected the fragile, compliant wife he had conditioned me to be. He expected me to lower my eyes to apologize and to follow him quietly out of the ballroom to avoid causing a public scene. Instead, I shifted my weight smoothly to my right foot. I rotated my shoulder inward, a precise, calculated movement that broke his aggressive hold instantly. His hand slipped off the smooth silk of my gown, leaving him grasping at empty air. I did not flinch. I did not step away. I stepped directly into his personal space, forcing him to lean back to avoid a collision. "Do not ever touch me again," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet laced with such cold, terrifying authority that he physically recoiled. Before Derek could recover his balance or formulate a response, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of conversation began to fade as the ballroom lights dimmed slightly, shifting the focus to the front of the room. A loud squeal of microphone feedback echoed through the grand space, followed by a tapping sound as the master of ceremonies tested the audio equipment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the booming voice announced, echoing off the walls, "please direct your attention to the main stage now. We are ready to begin the evening's presentations celebrating 40 years of unparalleled success and visionary leadership." Derek stood, frozen caught, between his desperate urge to physically remove me from the room and the sudden, overwhelming attention of hundreds of guests turning toward the front. He looked at me, his eyes wide, with a frantic, silent plea for compliance. I smiled at him. It was a cold, devastating smile that promised absolute ruin. I turned my back on my husband, leaving him standing there in a state of paralyzed panic. I adjusted the drape of my emerald gown, lifted my chin, and stepped confidently through the parting crowd, walking directly toward the main stage just as Richard began his slow, arrogant ascent to the podium. The ballroom was a sea of glittering jewels and tailored suits as Richard approached the grand podium. The polite applause from the hundreds of guests swelled into a roaring ovation, a testament to the illusion of power he had spent 4 decades carefully cultivating. He adjusted the microphone, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride, and looked out over the empire he believed was untouchable. "Thank you," he began, his booming voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers and vaulted ceilings. 40 years ago, I started this commercial real estate firm with nothing but a vision and an unrelenting drive to build a legacy. Tonight, we celebrate not just the buildings we have raised across the Chicago skyline, but the integrity the family values and the unbreakable foundation this company stands upon. He paused, placing a hand over his heart in a gesture of practiced, sickening humility. And as I look to the future, I know that legacy is in the greatest of hands. My son Derek has proven himself to be a brilliant financial mind, a devoted family man, and the rightful heir to the empire we have built together. The crowd erupted into more applause, raising their champagne flutes toward the front of the room. I could see Derek standing near the edge of the stage, his face still flushed with panic from our encounter moments ago. He was desperately trying to signal his father, his eyes darting frantically between me and the podium. But Richard was too absorbed in the adulation of his peers to notice his son's distress. This was his crowning moment, the pinnacle of his fabricated success, and he was soaking in every second of it. I kept my pace slow and deliberate as I navigated the final stretch of the ballroom floor. The emerald silk of my custom gown brushed against the legs of billionaires and socialites who parted ways from me, drawn by the absolute confidence radiating from my every step. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming wife they had ignored at countless charity dinners. I was the executioner, walking calmly to the block. As I reached the carpeted steps leading up to the main stage, Derek finally broke through the crowd. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched to grab my waist, but a group of elderly investors shifted into his path, oblivious to his frantic urgency. "Excuse me, Derek," one of them chuckled, clapping him on the back. "Wonderful speech your father is giving." Derek was trapped, forced to smile and nod while I glided gracefully up the stairs. Richard was mid-sentence, waxing poetic about the future acquisitions of his firm when he saw me approach. His words faltered for a fraction of a second, his bushy eyebrows knitting together in confusion. He had expected me to be locked in a dark room, heavily sedated, and waiting for a padded van. Instead, here I was, stepping into the spotlight under the glare of 100 flashing cameras. He leaned away from the microphone, his fake smile remaining plastered on his face for the benefit of the audience, but his eyes were cold and furious. "What are you doing up here, Felicity?" he hissed through clenched teeth, leaning in so the crowd could not hear. "Get off this stage immediately." I did not flinch. I simply offered him a radiant, loving smile that caused a murmur of anticipation to ripple through the front rows. I stepped directly up to the podium, forcing Richard to either step aside or engage in a physical altercation in front of Chicago's wealthiest elite. Given his obsession with appearances, he had no choice. He took a stiff, reluctant step back, yielding the microphone to me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly projected across the massive ballroom. The lingering chatter died down instantly. I know I am not on the official schedule tonight, but on such a momentous occasion, I felt it was absolutely vital to offer a loving daughter-in-law's tribute to the family that has shown me their true colors. I looked out over the sea of faces. The crowd offered a polite, encouraging round of applause. They thought this was a planned surprise, a touching addition to the corporate celebration. I saw Patricia standing near the front table, her knuckles white as she gripped her martini glass. She looked absolutely terrified, her eyes wide as she realized she had completely lost control of the narrative. Brittany stood beside her, looking confused and annoyed by the deviation from the schedule. I leaned closer to the microphone, letting a brief moment of profound silence stretch over the room. "For years I have watched Richard and Derek operate," I continued, my tone shifting from sweet to something sharper, something that commanded absolute attention. "They speak constantly about legacy, about building a foundation of trust, and about the importance of family. They have certainly taught me a great deal about all three of those things." I turned my head slightly, locking eyes directly with my mother-in-law. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. "I might not be able to handle a glass of your Merlot, Patricia," I announced to the dead silent room, my voice ringing with crystal-clear precision. "But I can certainly handle a balance sheet." Patricia flinched, as if she had been physically struck. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her chalk white beneath the harsh glare of the chandeliers. I did not give her a chance to recover. I looked toward the back of the ballroom, up to the elevated audio-visual booth overlooking the main floor. The lead technician, a young man I had generously tipped $10,000 from an untraceable account just 2 hours prior, was watching me intently through the glass. He had his instructions, and he was waiting for the exact cue I had promised. I gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. Instantly, the soft, ambient background music cut out. The massive digital screens flanking the main stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Richard's commercial properties, abruptly faded to pitch black. A collective gasp of confusion swept through the audience. Richard stepped forward, his hands raised to apologize for what he assumed was a technical glitch, but before he could speak a single word, the ballroom speakers erupted with a sound that would shatter their lives forever. "Hold her arms down, Derek. Do not let her thrash around." The audio was pristine, the high-definition recording, carrying Patricia's harsh, demanding voice into every single corner of the Drake Hotel ballroom. It was the undeniable sound of my assault. The crowd froze their champagne glasses, suspended in midair, their eyes widening in collective horror. "I am trying, Mother, but she is fighting it." Derek's frantic, aggressive voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, clear as a bell. "Just pry her eyes open so the facial recognition scanner can unlock the phone. We need that offshore account access now, before the margin call destroys Dad's company. Stop fighting us, Felicity!" The sickening sound of my muffled cries and the violent struggle filled the silent room. Patricia's hand began to tremble violently. The delicate stem of her martini glass snapped under the pressure, and the crystal shattered against the floor, splashing clear alcohol across her designer shoes. The crowd gasped in shock, recoiling from the wealthy family they had just been celebrating. But I was not done. The massive digital screens flanking the main stage flashed to life, bathing the entire ballroom in a harsh, unforgiving white light. I did not need to speak another word to the silent, horrified crowd. The visual evidence was about to do all the heavy lifting. I stepped back from the podium, my emerald silk gown catching the glare of the projectors, and gestured toward the towering displays. Instead of the anticipated slideshow featuring nostalgic family photos and triumphant ribbon-cutting ceremonies, the screens projected the undeniable, digitized proof of a sprawling criminal enterprise. The display split into two massive high-resolution segments. On the left screen, the digital footprint of Derek and Patricia's frantic, illegal bank transfer attempts materialized for everyone to see. It showed the exact timestamp from early that morning, projecting the high-definition scan of the durable power of attorney document they had coerced me into signing. Right beside it, the screen displayed the corresponding wire transfer request submitted to an offshore international banking institution. The amount requested was $2.5 million. The forged signatures, the fraudulent notary seals, and the routing numbers were blown up to 10 feet tall, impossible for anyone in the room to ignore or misinterpret. On the right screen, the foundation of Richard's entire legacy was systematically dismantled. The display projected his private double-booked tax ledgers side by side with the fabricated financial reports he provided to his investors. The disparity was staggering. The real ledgers showed a massive, gaping sinkhole of debt, while the fake reports projected the illusion of endless profit. But the true masterpiece of my digital dossier was the cross-reference data I had compiled. A sophisticated tracking algorithm began to run live on the screens, drawing thick red lines connecting the inbound investments directly to the outbound payments, covering older, failing properties. Then the names began to appear. I had programmed the presentation to specifically highlight the elite clients who were currently standing in the ballroom. The screen flashed bright crimson as it projected the names of high-net-worth individuals, their respective trust accounts, and the exact dollar amounts Derek had actively embezzled from them over the past 3 years. I watched as the senior partner from Derek's wealth management firm, the same man who had gawked at my arrival, stared at the screen in absolute terror. His personal retirement portfolio was listed right there, showing a complete liquidation of assets that had been secretly funneled into Richard's sinking commercial real estate projects. The silence in the grand ballroom shattered, replaced by a deafening eruption of chaos. It started as a low collective murmur of disbelief, then rapidly escalated into pure, unadulterated panic. The backslapping billionaires and elite socialites who had just been toasting Richard's unparalleled success were suddenly confronted with the cold, hard reality that their fortunes had been stolen to fund his extravagant lifestyle. Shouts of anger and confusion echoed off the vaulted ceilings. A prominent local politician dropped his champagne flute, the crystal shattering against the floors. He realized his campaign funds had been siphoned into Patricia's offshore casino accounts. The flow charts on the screens relentlessly traced the stolen money directly to her high-stakes poker rings and the predatory loans she had secured using non-existent corporate collateral. Patricia let out a guttural, horrifying shriek. She dropped to her knees in the front row, clawing at her perfect hair. Her socialite facade completely disintegrated as the names of the illegal gambling syndicates she owed flashed across the 50-foot screens. The elegant matriarch who had terrorized me for years was now nothing more than a pathetic, sobbing mess on the floor. Brittany, realizing the sheer scope of the legal nightmare, frantically pulled out her cell phone, completely abandoning her mother in a desperate bid to save herself. Richard was completely paralyzed. The titan of the Chicago real estate market stood frozen, just a few feet away from me, his face a pale, sickly shade of gray. His chest heaved as he stared at the undeniable proof of his Ponzi scheme being broadcast to the very people he had spent 4 decades deceiving. He looked out at the furious crowd, watching his investors turn on him with predatory rage. Several men in expensive suits were already shouting his name, demanding answers, pushing their way toward the front of the stage. Richard stumbled backward, his hands trembling violently, his legacy turning to ash right before his eyes. But Derek did not freeze. My husband had spent his entire life projecting an image of composed, arrogant superiority. Now faced with the absolute certainty of decades in a federal penitentiary, that mask cracked, revealing the violent, desperate coward underneath. He realized instantly that his entire career, his wealth, and his freedom were all completely gone. He looked at the screens, then at me standing calmly on the stage, the architect of his total destruction. His face contorted into a mask of pure murderous fury. A feral roar ripped from his throat. He shoved aside an elderly investor, knocking the man to the floor, and lunged toward the stage. His bloodshot eyes fixed on me with terrifying intensity. He was not trying to salvage the situation. He wanted to physically destroy the woman who had exposed him. "You ruined everything!" he screamed, his voice cracking as he scrambled up the carpeted steps of the stage. "I will kill you, Felicity! I will end you!" The crowd gasped, some stepping back in horror, while others shouted for security. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my expression devoid of any fear. I did not flinch or retreat as he charged toward me. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly what was about to happen next. I watched the violent desperation in his eyes as he crossed the stage, his hands reaching out to grab me, to silence me, to exert the physical control he had always relied upon. He was just 10 feet away. Then 5. Before his hands could reach me, before he could lay a single violent finger on my emerald silk gown, a thunderous crash echoed from the back of the ballroom. The heavy oak doors of the Drake Hotel Grand Ballroom burst inward with explosive, commanding force, slamming violently against the interior walls. The shouting and panic were instantly silenced. Dozens of heavily armed men and women poured through the entrance, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. They wore dark, tactical windbreakers with bold yellow lettering printed across their chests. FBI. Federal agents flooded the luxurious space, fanning out to block the service elevators, kitchen access doors, and fire escapes. There was absolutely no way out. The sheer volume of law enforcement made it abundantly clear this was a massive, coordinated takedown. Chicago's elite parted instantly, scrambling out of the way as the strike team advanced. The soft, ambient lighting illuminated the gold badges hanging from their necks. Derek froze mid-stride, his hands still outstretched toward me, his momentum dying instantly as the booming voice of a senior federal agent echoed across the silent, terrified crowd. "Nobody move," the lead agent commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Federal agents, we are securing this location." Derek slowly turned his head away from me, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he looked out over the sea of dark windbreakers advancing toward the main stage. The violent rage that had possessed him just seconds ago vanished entirely, replaced by the crushing, suffocating reality of his new existence. He was no longer a powerful, wealthy elite. He was now a completely cornered criminal, caught dead to rights in a room full of his victims, with federal law enforcement permanently closing the net tightly around him. The lead agent stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily against the polished hardwood floor. He signaled to 2 officers beside him, their movements sharp and practiced. Derek remained frozen near the edge of the stage, his chest heaving as the reality of the tactical windbreakers registered in his panicked mind. He raised his hands slowly, a gesture of surrender that felt entirely alien to a man who had never faced a single consequence in his 34 years of life. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, his tone devoid of any emotion. Derek hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward the ballroom doors, as if calculating an impossible escape. The officer closed the distance instantly, grabbing Derek by the shoulder and spinning him around with authoritative force. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the silent room sounded like a gunshot. "You are making a massive mistake," Derek stammered, his voice trembling as the cold steel clamped down tightly around his wrists. "My father is Richard. We have lawyers on retainer who will destroy you for this." The officer ignored the empty threat entirely, holding Derek by his bicep and reciting the Miranda warning in a steady, practiced rhythm. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I watched from the elevated stage as my husband was stripped of his dignity, his power, and his freedom in a matter of seconds. The bespoke, tailored suit he wore suddenly looked like a cheap costume draped over a terrified, broken boy. Across the ballroom floor, another team of agents converged on Richard. The titan of Chicago commercial real estate had not moved since the screens illuminated his monumental fraud. He stood perfectly still, a man trapped inside a collapsing monument of his own creation. As two agents approached him with zip ties and steel cuffs, Richard finally found his voice. "Gentlemen, there is absolutely no need for a public spectacle," he said, attempting to summon the commanding baritone that had intimidated city planners and contractors for 4 decades. "I am completely willing to accompany you quietly to the field office to sort out this massive misunderstanding." The lead agent, a tall man with a closely cropped beard and eyes like flint, stepped directly into Richard's personal space. "Richard, you are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering," the agent stated, his voice carrying clearly across the breathless crowd of investors. "Place your hands behind your back." Richard stiffened his face, flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. "I am a respected pillar of this community," he protested, his tone dripping with arrogant entitlement. "I will not be paraded out of my own anniversary gala like a common street thug in front of my peers." The agent did not blink. He grabbed Richard's wrist, twisting it smoothly behind his back with practiced, undeniable force. "You are a common street thug," the agent replied quietly as the cuffs snapped shut. "You just wore a nicer suit while you robbed these people blind." The collective gasp from the surrounding billionaires and socialites sounded like a rushing wind. They were watching the systematic dismantling of a dynasty, the brutal, unglamorous end of a man who had built his empire on the stolen futures of the innocent. A few yards away, the scene surrounding Patricia was infinitely more chaotic. She was kneeling on the crimson carpet among the scattered shards of her broken martini glass, her pristine socialite composure entirely eradicated. As a female federal agent moved in to detain her, Patricia began to scream. It was a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed off the crystal chandeliers, the sound of a woman watching her lavish, fabricated reality evaporate. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, thrashing her shoulders wildly as the agent secured her arms. "I am the victim here. That little tramp on the stage set us up. She manipulated everything. She forged those documents. I have never gambled a day in my life." The agent remained stoic, unfazed by the violent tantrum, and efficiently locked the cuffs around Patricia's wrists. "You are being detained for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit extortion," the agent stated, hauling Patricia to her feet. "Your offshore casino accounts are currently being frozen by the federal government." The mention of the frozen offshore accounts seemed to break the final tether of Patricia's sanity. She began to sob uncontrollably, her expensive makeup running in dark, messy streaks down her face. She looked toward the stage, her eyes meeting mine. The pure, unadulterated hatred burning in her gaze was something I would never forget. "You ruined us!" she wailed, her voice cracking as agents began to escort her toward the exit. Brittany, who had abandoned her mother moments earlier, stood frozen near the edge of the crowd. She clutched her designer purse tightly against her chest, her face a mask of absolute horror. The arrogant, obnoxious sister-in-law who had mocked my background and toasted to my impending commitment to a sanitarium was now shaking like a leaf. She watched her mother, father, and brother being marched toward the heavy oak doors in chains. As a secondary team of agents began moving through the room to interview the defrauded investors, Brittany suddenly realized the true, terrifying scope of her new reality. The corporate accounts were frozen. The offshore trusts were seized. The endless flow of stolen wealth that had funded her luxurious life in New York was gone forever. She was standing in a bespoke gown she could no longer afford, facing a future of complete and utter poverty. She sank into a nearby chair and buried her face in her trembling hands, sobbing quietly as her family legacy burned to ash. The lead agent who had orchestrated the raid walked purposefully toward the stage, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic remnants of the gala before locking onto me. The massive digital screens behind me were still running the automated flowcharts, projecting the indisputable truth of the embezzlement in glaring crimson ink. The angry shouts of the defrauded billionaires had quieted down, replaced by the hushed, urgent murmur of statements being collected by federal investigators. I took a slow, deep breath, allowing the adrenaline that had fueled my performance to finally subside. My emerald silk gown rustled softly as I turned away from the podium and gracefully descended the carpeted stairs. I walked directly toward the lead agent, the man whose encrypted communication portal had set this entire operation into motion. He offered a single, curt, highly professional nod to me as I approached, stopping just inches away from him in the center of the devastated ballroom. "Your digital dossier was exceptionally thorough," he said, his voice low enough to avoid being overheard by the lingering crowd. "The financial tracing was a masterpiece, but we need the raw files to make the extortion charges stick permanently." I reached into the sleek designer clutch I held at my side. I retrieved a small, heavily encrypted flash drive. It also contained the physical toxicology report confirming the sedatives they had used on me, alongside the original unedited audio files of my assault. "This will give you everything you need," I replied smoothly. The passage of time has a unique way of distilling pure chaos into cold, clinical procedure. Fast forward exactly 3 months from the night the crystal chandeliers of the Drake Hotel ballroom bore witness to the systematic dismantling of the Blackwell Empire. The glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos had been permanently replaced by the sterile fluorescent lighting and heavily varnished oak of a federal courthouse in downtown Chicago. The swiftness of the legal proceedings was something few people outside the justice system ever truly get to witness. It was a brutal efficiency, reserved only for cases where the evidence is so overwhelmingly insurmountable that defense attorneys essentially give up before they even begin. My legal team, armed with the undeniable digital dossier I had compiled, orchestrated a flawless multi-front assault that left Derek and his family absolutely no room to breathe, let alone mount a viable legal defense. I sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, my posture impeccable, watching the man I had once promised to spend my life with shuffle into the courtroom. Derek was no longer the arrogant, silver-tongued wealth manager who had effortlessly charmed the city's elite. He wore a standard-issue, oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed his previously athletic frame. His wrists and ankles were secured with heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against the polished floor with every hesitant step he took. The dark circles under his eyes were profound, and the confident swagger had been replaced by a hollow, terrified vacancy. He did not look at me. He kept his gaze firmly fixed on the floor, deeply ashamed of the pathetic reality he now occupied. The man who had physically assaulted me and attempted to steal my life's work was now nothing more than a broken shell, waiting for a judge to officially quantify his ruin. The divorce proceedings were finalized in record time, setting a precedent that my lead attorney remarked he had never seen in his 30 years of practice. There were no protracted negotiations, no mediations, and absolutely no compromises. The presiding judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for mercilessly punishing white-collar criminals, had reviewed the flash drive I handed over on the night of the raid. The physical toxicology report, proving the presence of heavy sedatives in my bloodstream, combined with the crystal-clear audio recording of Derek and Patricia violently coercing my biometric authentication, completely eradicated any legal standing Derek might have possessed. The judge looked at him with open disgust, her voice dripping with contempt, as she read the dissolution of marriage into the official record. She cited the criminal convictions, the documented attempted extortion, and the undeniable proof of physical assault as grounds for an absolute and total forfeiture of his marital rights. Every single protection I had secretly put in place held up flawlessly under the intense scrutiny of the federal courts. My multi-signature offshore corporate trust, the financial fortress Derek and Patricia had so desperately tried to breach, was declared entirely my own. I retained 100% of my liquid assets, my pre-marriage software patents, and the extensive investment portfolio I had built from nothing. I was awarded sole ownership of our multi-million-dollar townhouse, the very place they had tried to turn into my prison. The judge ordered Derek's name stripped from the deed immediately. He walked away from our marriage with absolutely nothing but the chains on his wrists and the impending reality of a decades-long federal sentence. The life he thought he was entitled to steal from me was legally and permanently secured in my name alone. But the justice I sought extended far beyond just untangling my finances from Derek's grasp. While the federal prosecutors were busy securing lengthy prison terms for the massive Ponzi scheme and wire fraud, my civil attorneys filed a devastating lawsuit against the remnants of the Blackwell family estate. We targeted the illicit gains Richard and Patricia had hidden away, the offshore casino accounts, the shell companies, and the properties purchased with stolen client funds. Because their crimes involved direct, documented harm to me, the judge awarded a massive civil judgment in my favor. This ruling effectively allowed my legal team to seize and liquidate whatever assets the federal government had not already frozen. The sprawling real estate empire Richard had bragged about from that podium was systematically dismantled and sold off for pennies on the dollar to satisfy the monumental debts they now owed. The financial ruin was absolute, but the immediate social ruin was arguably the punishment that devastated Patricia and Richard the most. In the rarefied air of Chicago's high society, wealth is the only true currency, and scandal is a terminal disease. The moment the FBI agents stormed the anniversary gala, the Blackwell name became toxic. The elite socialites who had happily sipped Patricia's champagne, and the billionaires who had slapped Richard on the back, completely abandoned them. Country club memberships were quietly revoked overnight. Invitations to charity galas and exclusive dinners simply stopped arriving. When Patricia tried to call her closest friends to ask for loans to cover their mounting legal defense fees, her calls went straight to voicemail. The people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress treated them like pariahs, severing all ties to avoid being infected by the fallout of their monumental disgrace. They were left with nothing. They were stripped of the power, money, and influence they had used to terrorize me and defraud so many innocent people. The illusion of the perfect family had been shattered beyond repair, replaced by a cold, harsh reality they could never escape. The once untouchable dynasty was reduced to a public mockery. Their monumental rise and catastrophic fall became the ultimate cautionary tale in the Chicago Tribune. I had reclaimed my life on my own terms. The nightmare was finally over, and my sweet revenge was complete, leaving me free to build a future unburdened by all their lies. 6 months have passed since the night the Blackwell dynasty collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The bitter chill of that Chicago winter has long since surrendered to the vibrant golden warmth of early summer. I am sitting on the expansive wraparound balcony of my new penthouse, an architectural marvel of floor-to-ceiling glass and brushed steel that sits proudly above the city. The view from up here is nothing short of spectacular. Lake Michigan stretches out before me like an endless ocean of deep sapphire, its surface glittering under the afternoon sun. White sailboats drift lazily along the water, completely detached from the frantic pulse of the city below. I take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. The townhouse I once shared with Derek feels like a lifetime away, a distant nightmare that no longer has the power to reach me. This ultra-modern penthouse is entirely mine. I paid for it in full, transferring the funds directly from the offshore accounts I had spent years quietly and meticulously building. There are no cosigners, no marital claims, and absolutely no strings attached to this sanctuary. I reach out and pick up the crystal wine glass resting on the sleek patio table beside me. The deep crimson liquid catches the light, reflecting a rich ruby glow. It is an exceptionally rare vintage Merlot. I pour it myself from a bottle I purchased with my own money, opening it in the absolute safety of my own home. I bring the glass to my lips and take a slow, appreciative sip. The taste is complex, bold, and incredibly smooth. There is no lingering fear of hidden sedatives, no creeping dread that my autonomy is about to be violently stolen from me. Every drop is a testament to my freedom. I lean back against the plush cushions of the outdoor sofa, feeling the gentle breeze ruffle the hem of my silk lounge set. For years, Patricia had criticized my taste, mocking my preferences, and dictating every aspect of my existence. She wanted me to be a small, compliant shadow, terrified of my own shadow, and grateful for the scraps of attention they threw my way. Now, she is fighting for the bottom bunk in a federal holding facility, while I am sitting at the very top of the world. The quiet vibration of my cell phone on the glass table interrupts the tranquil silence. I glance at the screen. It is an urgent message from the chief executive of a major international banking conglomerate, practically begging for a consultation. I ignore the message, setting the phone face down with a satisfied smile. The cybersecurity consulting firm I launched just 4 months ago has exploded into an unprecedented success. When the details of my digital dossier against Richard's commercial real estate firm became public knowledge during the federal indictments, the corporate world took immediate notice. They saw the flawless execution of my forensic accounting, the undeniable precision of my tracking algorithms, and the absolute destruction I had rained down upon a seemingly untouchable empire. Almost overnight, my firm became the most sought-after security asset in the country. I am no longer seen as a quiet, unassuming wife. I am recognized globally as one of the sharpest forensic minds in the industry. My waitlist for new clients is currently stretching past the 2-year mark. I turn away incredibly lucrative contracts on a daily basis simply because I refuse to compromise the elite standard of my work or surrender my newly reclaimed personal time. The irony is beautifully poetic. Richard and Derek built their entire fabricated legacy on deception, hiding their monumental failures behind a polished facade of corporate arrogance. They looked at me and saw a boring IT girl, a naive, easily manipulated target they could use to balance their books and absorb their impending financial ruin. They drastically underestimated the intelligence of the woman they invited into their home. I did not just balance their books. I weaponized their own greed against them, exposing every hidden ledger and fraudulent transaction until there was absolutely nothing left. I closed their entire chapter permanently. I take another sip of my Merlot, letting my gaze drift toward the towering skyscrapers of the financial district. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, the remnants of Derek's former wealth management firm are still scrambling to recover from the catastrophic fallout of his embezzlement scandal. The partners who used to ignore me at holiday galas are now facing endless federal audits, their reputations forever tainted by their association with that man. The sheer magnitude of the Blackwell family's public disgrace continues to ripple through Chicago's elite circles. Brittany was recently photographed by a local tabloid working as a hostess at a mid-level restaurant, her designer wardrobe replaced by a standard-issue uniform. The article mentioned her spectacular fall from grace, noting how quickly her high society friends abandoned her the moment her offshore trusts were seized. She is learning the hard way that the loyalty of her peers was entirely dependent on the stolen wealth she can no longer provide. As the afternoon sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue across the balcony, my lead security engineer steps out through the sliding glass doors. He is a brilliant young analyst I poached from a rival firm, and he holds a sleek tablet in his hand. "Sorry to interrupt your evening, Felicity," he says, his tone completely respectful. "But we just finalized the security protocols for the new European acquisition. The encryption layers are fully operational and impenetrable." I offer him a genuine, relaxed smile. "Thank you, Marcus," I reply, my voice carrying the easy confidence of a woman who is completely in charge of her destiny. "Tell the team they did excellent work today. Let us shut down the servers and enjoy the weekend." He nods, returning my smile, and steps back inside the penthouse. What happened to me was not a lesson about becoming colder. It was a lesson about trusting evidence when affection is used to make you doubt your own senses. Derek and his family counted on shame exhaustion and social pressure to keep me silent. They believed that if they called my work insignificant often enough, I would eventually forget the power of the skills I had earned. They were wrong. The first step toward freedom was not the gala, the dossier, or the federal raid. It was the quiet moment when I stopped accepting their explanation and preserved the recording. Protecting yourself can begin with something that small. Documenting what happened, securing your accounts, seeking independent medical or legal help, and telling a trustworthy person before an abuser can isolate you. Justice also required patience. I wanted to confront Derek the moment I heard his voice on the audio file, but anger without protection would have warned him and placed me in greater danger. I built a defensible record, protected my assets, and let each member of the Blackwell family expose the next layer of the conspiracy in their own words. Their downfall came from the choices they continued making when they believed no one could stop them. Most importantly, financial independence means little without control over your own body identity and decisions. No marriage surname or family reputation gives anyone the right to drug, intimidate, diagnose, or manage another adult for personal gain. Boundaries are not cruelty. Evidence is not betrayal. Leaving is not failure. Have you ever recognized that someone was using concern as a form of control? Share what helped you trust yourself again in the comments. If Felicity's fight for autonomy and accountability resonated with you, like this video and subscribe for more stories about people who turn betrayal into strength without surrendering who they are today.